humility is probably the most endearing quality of human relationships. When someone is humble, almost automatically my heart goes out to them. And yet we all know, and we discuss so often on this program and many others, what a strange world we're living in, what a deceptive world. Because in this world, what appears to be true is often false. What appears to be false can often be true. What appears as strength can be weakness, and what appears as weakness actually can be a strength. Because many in this world, as Madhvi touched on, believe humility can be a weakness. And yet I would say that humility is really the expression of the true self, the authentic self, the original self. And when I'm in that space, that inner space, the automatic expression of humility is self-respect. When I have self-respect, I will be humble. It's when I lose my self-respect, that I build the walls of ego around myself. And true humility radiates a gentle quality, a beautiful, beautiful, gentle strength, I would say. And so humility is really such a beautiful quality. And the one with humility is one who is rarely offended, rarely feels hurt by anything, and does not feel insulted. You know, in my personal journey, I've practiced so many things over the years to, keep learning and keep growing. And one of the things that I passed through for quite a period of time was that whenever I did feel a bit of insult or hurt or offended, whatever, I always thought, yes, it's my ego that accepts that. When I'm really humble, I don't feel that. And I once heard an analogy that, when we're full of ego, and really this whole world is nurturing my ego, I'm like a stone. And when you scratch a stone, it leaves an indelible scar on the stone. And that's why when there's a lot of ego and there's events in life, they leave an indelible impression. I can't forget what people have said and what people have done. If there's even just a little bit of ego, it's like I'm like water. So when you run your finger over water, it parts, but it quickly comes back. Yes, maybe I am a bit offended. I am a bit hurt. I do feel a bit insulted, but quickly I come back to my true self once again. But really, when I live in my self-respect, and the expression of that is humility, the soul, the individual is like light. Nothing can influence me. And this is why, as Madhvi said so beautifully, it is a huge power. Humility is a huge power, and perhaps the unknown power. But also the one with humility remains content. And that sweet space where when others, are having success in life, when it seems others are being put forward, you feel content, you feel satisfied. There's a beautiful line that I love, that the one with humility is content, and the one who is content experiences everyone to be blameless. Isn't that a beautiful state of being, that I live my life in this very challenging world, but I don't have this terrible feeling inside of blame and accusation, which often creates the most discomfort, a huge discomfort internally. Humility, the one with humility, wins the love of the heart. Is there anything more precious than that purity of love, that purity of tent, when there's just that energy of love that hits you? That's such a huge power. And really the law says the more humble I am, the more my heart will be filled with love. The one who is humble can respect everyone, and as a result, everyone will respect them. The one who is humble is merciful and compassionate. And so we suspend our judgment, just constantly judging and analyzing. I can see people are suffering. So rather than putting my energy into why they're suffering, I put my energy into supporting them during their suffering. You know, humility is just such an extraordinary quality. And yet, listening to all those beautiful products that humility brings into my life, there's a very, very common feeling out there. And I've been asked numerous times, if you're humble, won't everyone just walk all over you? Have you heard that? I'm sure you've heard that. And yet, I think that there is a false humility. And the false humility is the bowing down, the prostrating myself in front of others. That's a humility born out of ego in a sense. So it's just an external bowing down. It's not an internal state of being. That's like a false state of humility. But I would say when there's true humility, it is a very gentle state, a very loving state, but it's also a state of power and a state of strength. A humble person can stand up for themselves. A humble person will not be walked over by anyone or pushed around by anyone. But in dealing with all the various situations of life, they will still remain very gentle, very loving, very kind, very considerate. So they're not weak, but they remain soft and gentle in their response to absolutely everything. And you know, all of us who come to this beautiful event that Madhvi hosts so wonderfully, and we come from all corners of the world, but why? Because all of us are on this extraordinary internal journey, which to me is the most important thing in life. And how would you describe the spiritual journey? Perhaps there's so many different ways, but one of the ways I love is that this journey, this internal journey, is dismantling my ego. In a sense, it's putting a death to my ego. My ego dies. Even in the Brahma Kumaris, sometimes we use the language dying alive. Sounds pretty scary, doesn't it? But what it really means is I die from my ego. I die from my old self. I die from an addiction to taking sorrow, taking hurt, worry, fear, all the stuff we know. And the more I die from ego, I give power, I give birth to the unknown power of humility. The more I let go my ego, automatically humility grows in my life. I live in a state of self-awareness. I live in a state of self-respect. And this begins to grow humility. And as it does, the shadow of my ego, the shadow of all those feelings which are unpleasant feelings, begins to lessen and lessen. And yet, I would say that, you know, the path to humility is what I would say is really quite a tricky path, because humility is one of these spiritual qualities which is quite misunderstood. And hence why a lot of people see it as weakness, or a lot of people feel that when you're humble, everyone's just going to walk all over you, because we don't really understand it. And I would say that, you know, the one form of humility that, you know, one of the aspects of humility, or it's interpreted as humility, is this religious humility, or this, I would say, devotional or bhakti style of humility, which is more subservience than humility. You know, that humility where we become a bit like a doormat, you know, a doormat that others can walk over. Because we start to feel that humility is, allowing people, bowing down to people, bowing down to groups, just bowing down. But actually, that's not humility, that's subservience, I would say. It's like I'm suppressing myself, and yet I'm telling myself I'm humble. And often, the more I bow down, the more I suppress myself, the more I feel that I'm actually humble. But this is not really humility. This is more subservience. It's the doormat style. It's not the true understanding. Perhaps there's another type of humility, or it's expressed, which is like an obedience based on fear. Sometimes I fear, losing someone's respect, or losing someone's acknowledgement, or losing someone's attention. And so, out of fear of losing those things, I become very obedient to what they want. But really, it's because I fear losing my position, my role, my responsibility, my reputation, a whole lot of things like that. And so I sort of keep bowing down in that sort of way, becoming obedient on the surface. But once again, internally, I'm doing this because I want certain desires fulfilled. So sometimes it's like the humility that we've seen has been polluted with some of these feelings. Even I would say sometimes humility is submissive. All of us inside carry a lot of opinions about things. And sometimes we feel that humility is suppressing my opinion. Everyone around me, I don't really say what I feel because I want them to like me. I want them to, respect me. But I keep pushing myself down, all my opinions down. Sometimes I'm bursting with opinions and ideas, but I feel humility is not expressing them in front of the gathering. But that's also not humility. I've even found some people who keep suppressing their opinion feel it's other people suppressing them, but it's not. It's me suppressing myself. And so there's so many different sort of misunderstandings around the story of humility. But I would say that the journey to humility is the journey of spirituality. And as we talk about it so many times when you do these programs, at the heart of this spiritual journey is removing two shadows. I would say letting go two shadows that are suppressing my humility, suppressing that feeling of humility inside. The first shadow is my ego. And this is something which I've accumulated over a long, long time, so long that I identify it is who I am. And yet, when I'm under the influence of my ego, it has a whole effect on my thinking, my feeling, my behaving inside. I often call it the eye of superiority, or the eye of arrogance. And when I'm under that eye, I compare with everyone around me. And I begin to think, I am better, I know more, I am right. But when it comes into my feelings, when my ego is ruling, that's when I will feel so easily insulted, disrespected, not valued, excluded, sensitive. What is the seed of all these emotions that often dominate my life? It's my ego. What is my ego? It's an attachment to a false sense of self. I have become attached to an identity that is not true. And this is why this journey is beginning to dismantle this ego. Because the more I do, I start to give birth to my original nature, which is to be humble. The result that when I live under the shadow of ego, which all of us do in most ways, sometimes we feel I don't have much ego because I'm quiet and I don't say much. Actually, it's nothing to do with that. Someone can be very expressive and very humble. It's more your state of mind. The way I often understand how much ego I have is how mentally critical I am. I might be in a gathering and I might have a bit of a smile on my face, but I might be saying, I don't like this and I don't like that, and why are they saying this and why are they saying that? To me, that's an indicator of how much ego I have. But the result of ego, when my life is dominated by my ego, is fear. I fear that people will see through my facade, this ego facade, and see that I'm not such a confident person as I may appear or I may want others to feel I am. But the real effect when I'm not in my original state of humility, but I'm under the temporary state of my ego, is I feel separate. I feel disconnected. I feel I don't belong. Sometimes we have such a strong feeling that there's no belonging around. People aren't warm, but it's actually my ego deceiving me. And sometimes I feel I don't belong to others. And there's this real sort of mentality of me and you, us and them. I feel so separate. This is the role of ego. But not only to others, I feel separate from my true self. I feel separate from that real spiritual me, the humble me, the original me. I even feel separate from truth. I feel separate from God. This is the power of ego in our lives. And so on this journey to this power of humility, I begin to understand the shadow of ego and its effect on almost every thought, every feeling, every word, every behavior, every action. But the second shadow is the ego of inferiority. I often call it the eye of lack of self-respect or the eye of inferiority. And this is probably the most powerful shadow suppressing my ability to be humble or have that sense of self-respect. When this eye is ruling, I compare with others too. And I begin to think others are better, others know more, others are right. And when it comes into my feelings, that's when you have these deep, deep feelings inside of feeling hopeless, inadequate, unworthy, inferior, depressed. All these feelings are the child of a false sense of self. Because I've identified I'm attached to my temporary body, it gives birth to this false sense of self. And when this eye is ruling, it's like I wear spectacles and my perception of everything is distorted. Whether it's my ego of superiority or my ego of inferiority, it distorts my perception of everything. And I begin to feel, because of my lack of self-respect, my sense of inferiority, that people look down at me. No one values me. No one respects me. But actually, I'm being deceived by my ego. And so we've begun this journey to really take back the power of humility. And I begin to observe that I've attached my understanding of myself to a false self. And that's given to my body, my temporary body. That's given birth to my ego of superiority, the ego of inferiority. These shadows suppress that beautiful, radiant quality of humility. And this is why this journey is, the third eye is the original eye. I, the soul. This is lifelong learning. Every day, I would say every hour, every minute, I need to revisit the reality of who I am, to regrow the true feelings of self-respect and humility in myself. And to do that, I visualize myself as the soul. And sometimes we just visualize this sort of spark of light in the center of the forehead, but actually the soul is so extraordinarily subtle. It is so subtle that it has no material size. Just even stop for a moment and get your head around that you are sitting in the front of your brain. You are so minute, so small that you can't be measured in any way. In fact, you're non-physical. And you are activating this physical form. You are expressing through your eyes, expressing through your mouth. But when this incredibly unique, beautiful, subtle being, the soul, forgets itself and starts to identify with the temporary self, then the shadow of ego has suppressed so many of my qualities, including the power of humility. And so ego has really dominated me for such a long time. And this is why really on this journey, our aim is to live in a soul conscious state. When I not only just know that I am the soul, and I have the belief, 80% of the world holds this belief that there's something more than a body, but I actually practice it in my life. I start to emerge my natural and original qualities, and one of them is that humility, if I can say an egolessness, which is actually one of the most beautiful experiences of life, when I really sit in my intrinsic natural state, that I'm this point of light. I am immortal, eternal, and non-physical energy. The aim really of this life is to live in a soul conscious state. It's actually something that I have been in the past. And the more I live in a soul conscious state, it's almost like I begin that journey of dismantling what I've accumulated over a long, long time. All this ego, which is actually the seed of all the give and take of sorrow, suffering, pain, and unhappiness in life. And so this is really, this journey to begin towards the power of humility. But the second step for me is really experiencing a quality of true love. Somehow true love gives birth to that intrinsic feeling of self-respect. And when I have that natural self-respect, the external expression is really love. We search for true love. Sometimes I feel it's the subtext of human life, this search to really taste a love that I have a memory of. I have a memory of true love, of perfect love, of divine love. And even though I live my life and I get involved in the family and everything, inside there's still this search, this yearning to experience that love. And so what do? I invest my heart in relationships. I give everything to my family, to my friends, to everyone. And yet there's this huge human dilemma, and that is that no relationship is permanent. Whether it's time, whether it's change, whether it's conflict, whether it's separation, whether it's death, no relationship is permanent. And this has created so much fear and insecurity inside myself. But the beauty of spirituality is that we explore the one relationship that's permanent, the relationship of I, the soul, with the Supreme Soul. Who is the Supreme Soul? When we talk about the Supreme Soul, we have the image of that beautiful point, the eternal form of the divine, the one that never changes, is beyond influence. But that being is also the one who remains eternally egoless, has never sort of adopted a body, a bodily image, and gone through what we've all gone through, and remains, in a sense, absolutely pure, uninfluenced, and if we can say, eternally humble. And because of that egoless state, that is why the heart is so attracted to the Supreme Being. And when we begin to explore meditation, for me, what I love to do every morning is to sit down and just, in a sense, almost coach myself to let go all the limited identities of my body and just feel myself so lightly on the forehead. I feel myself becoming so subtle, so small. And in a sense, the more I withdraw and step back, I come to this place of internal peace and stillness. And then I look through the eye of my mind, and through the subtle thread of my intellect, I touch the divine, I touch God, I connect with God. It's like I'm in union with the one who's egoless. It is so attractive. And it's like when I come into the company, I also begin to feel I divest myself of this temporary identity that I've accumulated over such a long, long time. And it's like a freedom. It's like my joy comes back, my happiness comes back, because ego is probably the most powerful and destructive force in how I feel about myself, in how I interact with other people and experience life. It has distorted my life. But the more I become like the one I love, the Supreme Soul, I become that soul. It's almost like as I let go all the labels of my body, all the accumulation of ego, I start to step back and I start to feel this incredible, but often unknown power, this extraordinary spiritual power of humility, which is really the power that attracts love, that attracts respect, and attracts goodwill in the most natural way. When I am living my life and I'm just naturally humble, my life, my heart will be so full of others' goodwill and love. It's the nature of humility. I once remember someone saying to me that they really love very old people and little children. Why? Because they're relatively egoless. There's almost like a law that says, the more ego I have, the less love I experience. Or we can look at it the other way. The more I'm humble, love comes into my life from every side. And when love really enters my life, and I'm living a life of love, there is no more beautiful life. It's like you feel content. You have what you need. And so the desires for recognition, the desires for respect, the ego desires that just often dominate my thinking just lessen and lessen and lessen. And it's almost like I've got the formula of how to live life. Because the more I live it in the awareness of the self, and it's not just a belief, I actually feel like I'm a bodiless soul, even though I'm expressing through my body. And I remember the one who's the lover of the soul, the one who's eternally egoless. It's a real living relationship. I'm not believing in a concept. I'm not meditating on an intellectual idea. I'm actually in union with a real living being. And when this connection is there, it just unleashes an extraordinary power in my life. And that is really the power of humility. And when those two things are solid within me, because the spiritual journey is really self-realization, living as a soul. reconnecting with the one relationship that's permanent. And I have this natural lover in my mind, the Supreme Soul. When that platform is there, it's like the unknown power of humility automatically permeates my life. And, you know, humility in relationships. As I was touching on a bit early, to me, my observation in life is the most destructive thing is ego. And yet humility is the most healing thing. One with humility, just being around, they resolve problems. There's one of the elder Dadis of the Brahma Kumaris, Dadi Gulzar, who only passed away a year ago in her mid-90s. You know, when I was with her, I used to feel I'm actually with an egoless human being. It was like she was absolutely egoless. It was extraordinary. And she just was always being in that state, accepting everyone, not disapproving of anyone. And she was just so simple, but so humble, not needing to impress anyone or be anything or be noticed. And yet, because of that egolessness, she attracted so much love into her life. And that love just made her feel content and complete. But the seed of really so much of the beauty of her life was her natural humility. Even humility in leadership. You know, that's such a powerful thing. Once I was in New York and I was meeting with a man called Dr. James Jonah, and he was the Undersecretary General for Political Affairs. And he was at the time of Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, etc. And he had to deal with all of these people on behalf of the Secretary General. And actually, we were making a little film. And I was interviewing him, and I said, you know, you've met all the main leaders that are living in the world at the moment. Who impresses you the most? And straight away he said, Dadi Prakash Mani, who was the head of the Brahma Kumaris at that time. Because he said her leadership is based on her extraordinary humility. And when a leader is humble, it is such a powerful thing because their leadership is to serve. Whereas today, a lot of leadership is to fulfill my needs. Because I lack self-respect, I need a role, a position, acknowledgement from outside. And so often people actually want a leadership role to fulfill, shall we say, a lack of self-respect. But when a leader lives in self-respect and is absolutely humble, and I would say has that humility of vision. In other words, my vision, I see everyone as a soul too. I look beyond the conditions of the body. I see the other as a soul. So my vision isn't positioning myself as superior or inferior, as better or worse. No, humility has that vision of equality. You are my brother. And when I have those feelings inside me of brotherhood, when I look at you and the energy of my eyes and my face and my forehead is loving you, respecting you, accepting you, etc. That is such a gift of the humble soul. The humble soul will express that love and goodwill for absolutely everyone. You know, humility in action is such a wonderful thing. When the soul is humble, the soul expresses itself through the body. And when we meet that person who will do anything, will support anyone, will cooperate with anyone, doesn't feel that they need special privileges or special acknowledgement, once again, the beauty of their life is love. The more humble you are, the more you will attract love in your life. And this is why really humility is, you know, often perhaps an unknown power, but a very great power in this world. And I would say that the more I practice to be a soul, the more I remember God, the more I will imbibe a quality of humility in my life. And the more that I have that feeling within myself, feeling of fullness, I don't need much. I'm content, I'm satisfied. I know my self-value. It's like I'm coming back to the truth of really who I am. Humility is in fact our natural state. Ego is in fact a conditioned state of being. And this is why I think that, you know, this life, this spiritual life is a living journey from the ego state of body consciousness to the, shall we say, the humble state of soul consciousness. It's a journey. And it's an incredible journey of lifelong learning. And when you're on a journey, what happens? You go along and you face obstacles, you have problems, but you keep going. This is really the spiritual journey, to actually let go the body conscious ego and step back into this incredible power of humility. And when I do, I think it really enhances the quality of my life, enhances the quality of my relationships, and really enhances, everything around me.